Welcome to the Heart of Dad podcast. Heart of Dad is a podcast for entrepreneurs who are passionate about their families and business and looking to find more clarity, more balance and more alignment in all areas of their life. Come and join the community at heartofdad.com or on Facebook at groups/Heart of Dad. This week on Heart of Dad, I'm interviewing Mark Harrison. Mark has worked in the learning and development world, specifically in e-learning, for over 30 years and was a co-founder of Kineo, one of the top digital learning agencies in the world. He's married and has one daughter, now aged 23, and is working out what semi-retired actually means. Okay. So this week on the Heart of Dad, I'm delighted to introduce my friend and former business partner, Mark Harrison. Hi, Mark.
Hi there. I'm Matt.
Great to have you on the podcast this week. So, Mark,
good to be there as well.
Yeah, it's brilliant to have you and to catch up with you. Could you just start off by giving us a little bit of introduction about who you are? Tell us a little bit about Mark.
Yes, I mean I've spent 30 odd years in learning and development, and most of that time actually pursuing the very time-consuming and often frustrating process of getting new technology introduced into training from full stalls left, right and centre, which is and a lot of businesses got involved with, and then the final one, which I did with you, Matt, was, thank God, successful and has now freed me up to a position where I can pick and choose what I want to do. So I've achieved that moment, I suppose, that all entrepreneurs want to get to, is that you're financially stable and you can pick and choose what you want. And that's where I am at the moment.
Fantastic. And you're also a dad, right?
I am a dad. I have a daughter, 23-year-old daughter, who's broadly following in my footsteps, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. And that's a question I've been asking actually other entrepreneur dads on this program, but usually comes towards the end. But since you've mentioned it now, let's dive into that for a second. So tell us a little bit about Suzy and what she's up to and how that
Yes, I mean it's interesting how you connect with your children. Early on, you have your own personal hobbies and interests and things like that, and I suppose most dads hope that their child will match some of those. I mean, the classic daddy likes sport is looking forward to their kid liking sport and going off to football matches or cricket matches or whatever with them. Weirdly, my daughter had interests which were far removed in many ways from mine. She's very much into arts and crafts and was quite girly, I suppose, in that respect. But she liked reading books. She's quite a quiet soul, whereas I'm quite extrovert. But she had lots of good friends, and being an only child, there's always this sort of worry that are you spending enough time with them, and do you want to create friendship groups that actually she should be having with her friends? So there was always that sense of guilt in those early days that I wasn't sharing a lot with her. But weirdly, when it came to the point of being able to do holiday jobs, because I was an entrepreneur who had an organisation where we could snaffle our children in. I suppose it was the classic nepotism value of her coming along working in the summer, and she did various jobs left, right and centre. And that made her CV look pretty good from a digital media and writing point of view. She's a very good writer, so I always had confidence that whatever she would do, she wouldn't let anyone down. But the CV looked fantastic because she was working with this digital agency in Brighton. I mean, fantastic. And so as a result, when she came out of university, she actually got a job, got an internship in Bristol, where she went to university. And that has now led to her doing writing digital content in an international marketing agency, search engine optimization agency. And she's pretty much following what I was doing, but not in the learning world, but more in the information online marketing world and writing stuff for Unilever and people like that. So weirdly, we have much more to talk about. And I connected with my daughter by fundamentally taking her to work. So I think I was an absent father for big chunks of her earlier life, and she forged wonderful close relationship with my wife. And I would be traveling around the world because I was involved in the franchises that we had in the organization we both ran that. And as you know, I spent big chunks of time abroad. And so it'd be lovely coming back and seeing my daughter, but then I wasn't on the daily basis of being with her. And now we connect very strongly. So she'll ring me up and say, Dad, I think I need to find a video person. What do you think? And in fact, her first piece she had to write was about a website that you could run your learning from. And I helped kind of her write this brilliant article for the guy she was working for, because in effect, she knew more than the business he was in slightly in that area. So it was lovely to be able to share those things. But yeah, I wasn't around for a chunk of time.
Yeah, so to remind me, she would have been about 7, was she, when we started the business?
Yes, let's think. So we started in 2005. She would have been actually 9.
9,
just a little older.
Yeah.
And really, I suppose the foreign stuff kicked in really from her age of about 11 or 12. For about 3 years. So from about 12 to 15, I suppose, 12, 14 to 15, I was away quite a lot. Now, that was weird because, of course, those are some of the great moments for her in her memory, because she would come out. So she came out to Chicago, or she would come out to different places. So to some extent, I don't think she felt it was terrible that Dad wasn't around, because Dad was in slightly exotic places. But there were a lot of Skype calls, and I remember thinking, God, here am I catching them at night again. And it wouldn't be every night, because we wouldn't have enough to talk about sometimes. So it was like every couple of nights or whatever, there would be a call, and we would cover ground. But I kind of felt that they were forging their world, and I was separate. And I think the moment when I felt furthest away and most useless was I was working in Houston, and at that moment the news came through that Suzy, which would have been when she was 15, actually no, it's a bit younger than that, she hadn't actually got into the secondary schools she wanted, and the one that all her friends had got into. It was one of those lottery situations, and she got into the school where she knew no one. And it was a slightly tougher school as well. It wasn't suitable for her. And so it was one of those classic moments when you were going, what are we going to do all about this? And I was trying to kind of help, influence the situation, and I was too far away, and it felt terrible. There was I trying to think what other school options, could you get a scholarship somewhere, and I was all for pushing one way or the other, and I didn't know what she really wanted. And I couldn't really easily work that out because I was on a Skype call and things like that. So that moment, yeah, that was hard. But to some extent, I think I was leading a selfish life in some ways, because I got all of the travel bits, the business bits. I didn't get the boring bits. I didn't have to take her to guides every week, things like that when I was away. And yet when I came back, I would come back with 1 or 2 goodies, and it would be lovely for a few days, and we would have a great time, and maybe 2 weeks later I would go away again. And so to some extent I was slightly guilty that it kind of worked well. It worked well in some ways because she was an only child, so she got attention when I was around. It might have been different if I had 2 or 3 others, because I think I would have felt more and more distant from them probably.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. There's so much, and I want to pick up on. Maybe just starting first with what you were just sharing with us, and I've been talking a lot with dads about guilt, and I think that entrepreneur mindset we were just briefly exchanging before we hit the record button, weren't we, about how people who end up being entrepreneurs have to have a particular drive to succeed, a tenacity, and and you were describing that implicitly as well as explicitly. You did a lot of travel. You had to be pretty resilient. I mean, I remember you often coming in after big changes in time zone. You'd get stuck right back into work. I don't remember you resting much, Mark, in that period. I remember you pretty much always being available when people asked for you, which they did a lot. How did that play out, both in yourself and then in your relationship with Suzy, would you say?
I think it's quite hard. I mean, what we you'd land in it off the plane in the morning and go in and you do your work, and of course when you'd flake out, it would be when you got home, of course. So to some extent, yes. I mean, the best of you was in the office, and the worst of you was probably when you got home. I think actually I think it's all about personalities. I think my daughter is an introvert, but a very comfortable introvert, quite happy, and an only child. The combination means they're quite self-sufficient. It's not, I think if I'd had a more, where's dad, I want to play football in the yard all the time type, I think it would have been much, much harder, because I wouldn't have had the energy and the time to do it. Again, I wish I could say it was because I had judged the situation perfectly. I think I was just lucky with having a incredibly well-balanced and immensely nice kid, who remains like that.
Yeah. And I guess it's impossible to say, if another scenario had played out. But I was wondering almost if the converse was true, that because of your family setup, it created space for you to go and do that work in that particular way. Because I know that we all shouldered things in different ways in the business, but you really did, metaphorically take a bullet with all that travel.
Well, I did, but it was a bullet that had the other sides, of course, of a slight degree of exoticism. So I didn't. I mean, I think it was different. We both had a colleague who you have interviewed previously, Stephen, who had lots of young children, and that would have been wrong for him to have been doing what I was doing. I mean, I made a calculation that I felt that I could devote enough time to my daughter, and she was the sort of person who could use that time and not need a huge amount more to be able to do that. It helped because my wife was an artist, didn't have a regular job as a result, and she could easily be around, and had a great relationship with my daughter. I think my daughter has grown up to, we're very, very close, the three of us. I think many families of three often are, but I think it was very much the case. In fact, I'm in London at this very moment, and then we're having dinner with my daughter tonight, and I'm seeing a film with her tomorrow, and she's keen to do that. So we can do lots of these things together. I think working with her actually made a huge difference, spending a good deal of time when she was 17, 18, when she could have been drifting away from me, was perfect. I mean, if you can actually spend your whole summer walking into work with your daughter, having lunch with her, and then coming home, fantastic. Absolutely loved it. And I think in the end, that kept us close. But I think it would have been hugely different, I think, if we'd had more kids. I mean, I suspect I wouldn't have been as open to help out in all of our foreign operations as I was. So yeah, I think that balancing act, when you are both an entrepreneur and you are a bit of a creative soul. So when I worked on projects, it wouldn't just be the time you'd be in places. It would be time all consuming in what you were trying to do. You were writing stuff. We were running a business until midnight, or every night having conversations, but everyone was in bed. So that was all right. Suzy was in bed at 10. Then I did the working from 10 till 12. If your hours are okay and I'm a bit of a night owl, it didn't worry me too much. I was running webinars at 11:30 at night with people in New Zealand and things like that. And again, that didn't hit me because I was able to fit them in. So I think as an entrepreneur or a heavily business-oriented person, you have to do what you like doing, and they noticed that. It wasn't quite as, Dad, we want you to go because it's great for you. I don't think a young child could ever articulate something like that. But I do sense that even at this stage, there's an understanding that if I'm left not having projects and I'm not doing stuff and being wholly involved in setting up projects and doing stuff and writing and everything, is I'm not who I am. And currently my wife undoubtedly says, no, you're not going to retire. You're just going to keep working. You're going to keep doing stuff. And it's just, she knows it's right. And it is right. I don't want a lot of spare time. And I think that was partly what was going on when I was trying to be a dad, is that it was easy sometimes just to do that extra hour longer, because I wasn't like some other dads who would desperately want to get home. And was I a better or worse dad? I don't know. Maybe I would have been if there had been more children. But I think in the end, I just about got away with it.
I mean, I think there's lots of fascinating things in what you've just shared, but I wondered about that. What I've heard from other dads, and I've thought about myself, is that having the support of a family that creates the space emotionally as well as physically for you to do what you love is incredibly important. I think if you didn't have that kind of support, the stress of having to try and do what you have to make it kind of business work would be unbearable, I think.
I mean, as you said, I think there is something about the de-stressing quality of children. I mean, throughout all that period of time when we were building up the business and everything, every night I would read Harry Potter to her. All 6 books I read to her every night. It was a shared thing that we did. I enjoyed the whole experience probably as much as she did, in terms of it being a gentle bonding experience. And so whenever I was around, that's what I did. And that was nice. And the beauty was when I wasn't traveling, of course, we were based in Brighton and I lived in Brighton and I could walk home. So I do really feel for parents who work really hard and then get home when their kids are asleep every night. I think that would be terrible, knowing that you're in the house and you didn't see them before they went to sleep. That's hugely different from when you're in Houston and you can't see them. It doesn't hit you quite as hard. I think it's worse actually being in the place when you don't really see them for breakfast because you're out up early, and then you don't see them at night because you're back in late. Yeah, a nightmare scenario for an awful lot of people. Yeah. And they aren't necessarily entrepreneurs. They're just people working in jobs that are too far away from where they actually live, but Absolutely. They can't do it any other way.
Yeah, and one of the joys and benefits of a successful business is that eventually you also get quite a bit of flexibility when you have good people around you, that you don't have to if the kind of the bell curve of effort kind of comes towards the kind of lower end eventually, but the first phases are incredibly demanding and steep.
Yeah, but that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the other end of the bell curve, it is quite hard for your ego when you realise that people don't need you.
Yeah.
And I think children, if your children are still young during that period of time, are suddenly seeing you and they're getting more of you, but they look at you and they think, well, wait a minute, what are you doing here? This isn't the dad I knew. And suddenly maybe there's a little too much oh, let's take you here. I can take you there. They think, well, I'm used to going with mum, or I'm used to going with my other friends. I think actually to crash in on a kid's life just because as an entrepreneur you've made it and it's a bit early is tough. And again, it's fascinating how Stephen, our old colleague, has managed to get to a position where he's been at home much more now because he got to that position younger than you and I in that respect.
Yeah.
And he was able to crash into their lives. And I suspect that was a bit weird early on. I think Stephen did say it was very strange, but he's now completely into the swing of it, and not surprisingly sees the value from being around.
Yeah, he has some great things to say about that when I interviewed him about it. Well, one question I had for you, Mark, was how you talked about kind of the de-stressing element of having a child in your life, and I've been very open in my podcast that I don't always find that the case. I mean, I do find having a child at times completely de-stressing and wonderful, but there are times when I find it the absolute opposite, and particularly when I'm kind of very project or work oriented, then I find my tolerance for some of the things that maybe somebody who is a bit more happy-go-lucky would find would kind of laugh off. I find a bit more difficult, and I just wondered about you, about switching off. How easy did you find it to switch off from work and really be present with?
If there's something to do that I have no choice on, it's manna from heaven. I mean, I think that's the beauty about children, is that what they need, what they want, and if they need you to do it, it's the most important job in the world, so it dwarfs anything else you're doing. But secondly, it's just simple. It's straightforward. You just do it. And I think this gets a bit deeper than just being a dad. Generally, I think it really depends on why you get up in the morning. There's a bigger sense. I don't think I've ever known quite how to. I'm not religious. I don't have a reason to do anything, really. And in most cases, you're driven by things that are interesting. You're driven by things that you get some satisfaction, maybe some rebound by people saying how good you've done something, so it helps your ego a little bit. But in many cases, you're doing things because you need the money by the end of the month. And for us, when we set up the business, didn't want to let you guys down. So obviously, there was this huge sense of joint pushing along. But what's fascinating is that none of those are really important compared with what the needs of the child is. And I think the moment when I felt most happy, weirdly, was when my daughter was probably at her most miserable. She had a really terrible cough, which actually just kept going and going and going. And in the end, she was really young at that stage. And I remember at the time, I'm not the smallest of human beings, bear-like, and she somehow found more solace in my huge presence than, for the first time ever, my wife. And I remember at the time thinking, this is a miserable place, but God, isn't this nice that I can actually be of some good here, that I'm actually helping this small child calm down. And I can remember that I think just those moments when you do it take you to a level that just isn't anywhere else. I mean, running a business, it's just it's a thing to keep interested in before you pop your clogs, ultimately. And it's none of this really that important. And yet having a child is. I mean, I feel that only people who have children can understand that. And I can't think of anything more important than the happiness of my daughter. I mean, in many respects, more than the happiness of my wife, because she's an individual. It's her responsibility. She's a grown-up. My daughter, you feel you really want her to be happy all the time and to be satisfied, and it never goes away. So I actually think that every minute I spend in her company worrying about what she's doing or being with her was a blessing. It took me away from getting too hooked up in what I was doing. I appreciated it. So yeah, maybe it's just a difference, slightly personality between you and me.
No, it's lovely. It's really, really beautiful what you just shared. And I just want to circle back to where you started talking about Suzy's connection with a similar world of work now, and it's very sort of prominently imprinted on my mind those times when you brought her to the office, and I always thought that was a fantastic both bonding, which you've described, but also kind of it was kind of like modelling something, not just for you and your daughter, but also for the people we worked with. And I think you used the word nepotism, and I think there was, I think there was nothing of that in what you did, because if I remember, you paid Suzy out of your own pocket.
No. That was always made clear that but obviously there were people around who thought, well, actually, my children could benefit from their work experience and things like that, and you couldn't have obviously too many people around. So I appreciate. I pushed and vented a little bit, and there were one or two times when there wasn't anything really for her to do, and in the end, I kind of almost invented stuff just off the back of me to keep that going. She never knew. So in that respect,
you better come clean before dinner tonight, because this is
no one. I am hoping. Please God, she doesn't search for me now on your podcast. So she's not hugely into social media, so we might be safe. But, I always knew this would be a very dangerous thing to start sharing this with you. But I think it is always very important, because there was one particular time when she went out to Chicago. And that's a heck of a thing for someone to be able to do. But I felt it would be great for her to just work abroad for a bit. And she, in effect, did a kind of completely made-up marketing piece. The US guys were delighted to go along with it. They weren't, obviously. It was part of the same arrangement. But we, my wife and I, then left Chicago and left her in Chicago for a week. And she just loved Chicago. And it was just as part of this growing up exercise, which is really, really hard to do nowadays. I mean, there are not many 16 or 17-year-olds can do that sort of thing. And I just thought, well, no, this is just right. But it's got to feel real. It's got to feel like there's some value. So, I always had to work hard at making her feel that way. I think everyone was really kind and nice, and we created, I think all of us, and you especially, created an environment where people were kind and considerate, and so they were very nice to her. So, but she's a good girl, I mean, that was the key difference.
She took it seriously.
And she wasn't a petulant soul, which I think once or twice we did get one or two people in who feel connected, and I think they were a little bit iffy, from what I remember, and that didn't go down so well. And I think it was much to her credit that it never became an issue. But as I said, the beauty is that I think I always knew she could write well, and she really does write well. But she had a good business sense because of those experiences. She went along to bid meetings and things like that. And it was lovely because I could see she could handle it. And it's the world you understand. If she'd done something else, fashion design or things like that, I wouldn't have things I could share with her as much as I do now. So I can ask, what you've been doing and this and that. And she's about to be doing a film shoot with the Unilever guys, and of course that's something I understand and can appreciate. So I feel probably by working hard to make up for not being around, it's actually created a joint interest which will probably last now, because I think once you start on a career early on, it's kind of hard to deviate off it. once it's in your CV from experience. So I should probably carry on going that way.
No, I love what you've been sharing there. Well, I mean, I think you've been talking about this actually indirectly, but I've been asking other dads about balance in their life, and I just wanted to sort of get your take on it. Did you ever think about that dichotomy of work and other stuff, or family life and work in those terms, or did it just sort of blend into one thing for you?
Yeah, no, I do think there's a, because I've worked with lots of people, and I know people who absolutely at 5:30 go. That's it. Don't phone me, nothing, because I'm going to be with my family, and everything is about their family. And I appreciate that. I think they've probably got it right. Well, not probably. They have got it right. It's just that I've got a kind of warped need to achieve things, I suppose, which probably happened because I had a very introverted dad who never really showed much feelings or emotions to me, and so I probably spent way too much of my life proving myself to someone who probably quietly was already proud of me but never showed it. So it generated maybe a slightly overachiever mentality in my mind. But I also just liked doing things. I like doing things well. And so the combination of all of those, you just build it up and up and up. And that is another challenge. Oh, I love to do that. And I want to do that better than I did it last time. So there's this constant need to do things well. How does that sit then with the sense that it's 5:30 in the afternoon, and you don't know, are you going to do that extra hour or so just to get this finished and done properly? Well, for me, if something had to go out that evening for a client, I would carry on until I finished it. If it was 11 o'clock at night, I would continue doing it. I would never, at any moment in my head, think, this is wrong, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll tell the client it's a day late, or I'll do it, but it won't be brilliant. In my head, I would instantly think, no, this has to be done well. And that was just innately how I got driven to do it. And maybe that is a selfishness. And so I actually think in the end, the work-life balance, I probably didn't get right. And I think, as I said, because I had an only child, I probably got away with it. I think if I'd had a bigger family, I think it would have been tough, because it would have been those classic moments, that your partner says, well, wait a minute, I had to take so-and-so to this and so-and-so to that, and you're never around. I think there would have been a very, very legitimate pushback and say, you've got the balance wrong. Now, I think the people who were around with their kids all their lives and had a big family are blessed. We wanted more kids and couldn't. So my feeling is that they've probably got it right and I got it wrong. But you are who you become.
Right. And I think you've put your finger on what I think many entrepreneur dads would recognise, that the sense of really wanting to be to deliver for your clients, to be very concerned, connected for the outcomes of what you do, and how that can be in tension then with those other pulls towards family. Maybe you're right. Maybe a larger family would have changed that dynamic for you. But I think in your DNA, or something in your psychology, as you described it, in your relationship with your dad, that it had you kind of driving forwards for achievement.
Yeah, it is part of that. I mean, I'm going into Myers-Briggs and everything. I'm ENFP, which fundamentally means I'm completely a hostage to everything, fortune to everything outside. Love me, get it right, give me feedback. You are who you are. Now, that's not the sort of person who is very happy handing out slightly second-rate outputs because you can't stand the thought of someone going, well, I'm a bit disappointed by this. You know, that ENFP, that's like a death knell. So I think in that respect, you have to be really, really careful, because being excellent is a tough thing. I'd like to be excellent about everything you do, and that's a good trait, brilliant trait for an entrepreneur. If you do everything excellently, then you'll probably succeed, and businesses will need people like that. When you get home, you don't have to be excellent at playing games. You just have to be there. And I think, and I didn't try to be excellent at anything when I was at home, thank God. But I could see how difficult it could be in some way, because you can't put away that drive, and never happened in my instance at all. And my wife was just as good. We never passed on that drive for excellence into your children. And I wonder whether that has come up in other conversations or will come up in other conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a brilliant observation, and one I can totally identify with in my own story. And I was going to ask you, actually, since you mentioned your dad, you know, maybe you partly answered it now, you know, what imprint he had on your style of parenting or your choices as a parent. What did you do differently or similar?
Well, isn't it such a terrible thing to say? In some respects, as long as I did everything he didn't, then I'll be fine. Was certainly that. I mean, fundamentally, he was so introverted that he never made contact. You knew he was a decent guy, but he was from a generation where it was hard anyway to say you loved your kid. But he actually didn't connect with anyone, particularly my wife. My mother said that 50% of the time she didn't know what he was thinking. Well, that's pretty tough from a lifelong partner, not to have a sense of who your husband is. And what did it do? Well, I think it just allowed all of my family, I've got a brother and a sister, it allowed us or made us just make up our own ideas about what parenting should be. Because we never really, other than my mother who was very loving and probably gave a good role model there, we didn't get it from there. So my brother and myself, I don't think really had a father role model at all. And so I've never, ever been in a situation when I've gone, oh, I did that because my dad did that with me. I've never mirrored or duplicated a single thing that my father did. And that's both positive and negative. I've never found myself telling off my daughter in a way that dad told me off, but I've never also found myself thinking, God, actually that's what my dad said to me when I was upset, or etc. He never said anything about anything. And I think that has made me probably, as I said, slightly more determined to achieve in life, because that's what the small kid was trying to do to get attention. I'm a walking cliche. But I got to realize that in my 20s at least, and I was comfortable with Dad in his later life. I didn't need to confront him with it, because I knew that was what it was about. So what it meant for me was, I just thought, well, no, whatever dad I am, I'm going to have to invent this completely from scratch. I'm just going to have to be me and just hope this works. And in the end, obviously, I'm good enough at showing that I care. And obviously I genuinely did, that there was enough love in the family that it didn't really matter. As long as you show love, it doesn't really matter how shit you are as a dad. It was an interesting path to try and work through. So then when you're not around, because you're a bit of my dad was an entrepreneur, my dad was a teacher, so he was around all the time, but he was never around. That was the irony of it all. So I had no model either for what does a businessman dad look like, because he wasn't even that. So I was inventing everything in many ways.
That's thank you for sharing that. I think that would resonate with many people listening. How that can be a father can be such a positive imprint and a negative imprint on your own choices for how you parent. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, Mark, was your relationship with anger insofar as it kind of crept into being a parent. And I guess, Suzy's obviously, you've given a lot of who she is and how she is, and I can't imagine that there were many situations that were very inflammatory when he's growing up.
Yeah, it's a hard question to get round.
Yeah. So,
in terms of anger, I mean, broadly, I don't like conflict. I mean, that might again be going back down to if anyone knows Myers-Briggs, ENFP, then you like people to be happy around you generally. So obviously, I'm not someone who would use anger as a weapon or an instrument to try and get something done. It just wouldn't come naturally to me anyway. So I don't think we ever raised anything. I mean, this is the frightening thing: is that Suzy probably, in many respects, probably should have pushed us more. We sometimes it would mean that she had a bit more than oomph and pushing the boundaries a bit more, but she never did really. So I don't think we ever. Can't really think of a single moment when she made us angry.
Amazing.
And so therefore I don't think there's ever a point where we had to impose a single moment of discipline. I mean, in fact, the interesting moment that I can think of was when she first moved to her sixth form, so she would have been 17, she wanted to hold a party, and we thought her birthday comes early in the year, in October. And we thought, well, why don't you do that? It's a fantastic way for getting to meet people. And we thought, well, our house isn't necessarily our pride and joy. It's a very comfortable place. It's not perfect. We will risk them having the run around of the house. And we came back about midnight, and not surprisingly, there were a lot of people around, and some of them probably and clearly weren't invited. Nothing too chaotic. Beer was on the floor about 1 inch deep on the wooden floorboards. Someone had decided to raid the fridge and scatter it around the garden. But you could see that Suzy was just staring at me going, I'll never do this again in my whole life, look. And you could just see she didn't need anyone to tell her that this was a disaster. And so I said, that's fine, everyone can stay. Let's turn the music down. And I just started clearing up around, and some of the nice people started clearing up around, and then we didn't need it, So again, it was one of these classic things that I didn't need to say, what have you got wrong here? Because she knew already. So I think if you're blessed with kids who are smart and sensitive, life is incredibly easy as a parent. I do feel for people who have kids who have much more problems with everyday life and fight back, and God knows, they've just been very lucky. So I'm not sure how much people will learn from what I've talked about in this.
No, there's tons of value, Mark. Yeah, tons of value. One final question I had for you was around. So when we set up a business, there were 4 of us initially, and then 5 partners. So it's kind of we weren't solopreneurs as they say these days and such. But I wondered, particularly given what you said about travel, whether you had any experience of loneliness being an entrepreneur.
Well, as you said, I think that's really, really hard because we were a family. As you said, the 4 of us, and then became 5 of us. I mean, I think in that respect, it was quite hard to to easily equate that. There were times, obviously, when I was abroad, that I was the sole kind of owner representative. But to be honest, you were always facing human problems. You can't be lonely when something's going wrong or people can't work with people, etc. You're with people all the time. I think if you're on your own making decisions, absolutely the loneliness of being the person who's got to make the decision. But let's face it, as you know, Matt, I think we couldn't have been further from the truth in our situation, where it is a model that I hope I will repeat at some stage, where you have everyone having an equal ownership and an equal conversation. But the beauty about it was that there were talented people amongst us. And one person, Steve, who was a natural leader about it all. So you always trusted that ultimately, if it was a really, really hard situation and we couldn't agree on something, then he would probably go, let's do this. And you'd trust him. Mm. So I think in that respect, I think far from it. I mean, I think it was the most unlonely moment of my working life, I think, in many respects.
Yeah, I would echo that.
I was just lucky. I don't really think, I mean, you built me as an entrepreneur. I took risks like we all did, but I don't think I'm a real entrepreneur. I think I'm a semi-entrepreneur, really.
Well, you sound like a pretty real dad and human being to me, which is really kind of the heart of his conversations. It's been fantastic talking to you, Mark.
Great. Well, it's been very nice. It's the cheapest therapy session I've had for ages.
Don't worry, the bill's in the post. If people want to find out more about you, where could they do that?
Oh, God, I don't know. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, Mark Harrison. You can find me there. I think my Facebook is a desert of interaction. So probably LinkedIn is the best place. And just look me up there if anyone wants to follow up.
Brilliant. Thanks again. Really enjoyed the chat, Mark.
Pleasure and lovely talking to you again, Matt.